Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter Barnes and I chair the British-German Association. We are co-hosting tonight's event with the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, our German sister organisation, in what we hope will be the first of many joint events to come. Tonight is the first of 3 BGA events looking at issues of sustainability and climate change in the run-up to this autumn's COP26. So I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished speakers and moderator this evening, our speakers representing 2 major maritime regions of Britain and Germany. Frau Staatsrätin Möller is responsible for Hamburg's dealings with the federal government and with international partners. So she is in effect Hamburg's foreign secretary. And Frank Rogers is the long-serving and highly respected chief executive of Liverpool City region, which covers 5 local authorities in addition to Liverpool itself. And we're also very grateful to Nina Gillespie from Chatham House for chairing tonight's discussion.
Dear Peter, thank you very much from the German side, i.e. from the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, which I'm chairing. I'm particularly happy for your initiative and that for the first time since long, the BGA and the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft are co-hosting an event, and I express also my wish and the wish of the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft that this may be or will be a happy start for further initiatives. I should like to join you in the gratitude for our 2 speakers, Peter from Liverpool, Almut from Hamburg. I mean, she isn't from Hamburg, but she is representing Hamburg, as you said, as a great foreign secretary for the Free and Hanseatic City. I should also like to thank our moderator and in particular the 2 ladies who made it all possible, and that's Antonia and Mari. I wish us all a good evening. Thank you.
And I think it's over to me now. So as Peter said, my name is Nina Gillespie and I'm the manager for Chatham House's Hoffmann Centre for Sustainable Resource Economy. Quite a mouthful. And I'm delighted to join and to moderate this conversation on the future of sustainable cities. Just to kind of set the scene, cities really are at the heart of any ambitions that we have of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And with over half of the world's population now living in cities, as places, I think they have a real significant impact on the environment, be it the materials that are used to build them, to how we get around them, to the things that we buy when we're in them. And along with this, there are also increasing concerns about air quality, about access to green spaces and biodiversity in cities. And I think COVID-19 has particularly shone a light on a lot of these issues. But it's not all bad news. While there are enormous challenges in making cities sustainable, they also do have the capacity to drive forward some of the most ambitious action on climate and be leaders in building sustainability into the communities that people live in. And I hope that we're going to hear about some of that today. So with that, I'll hand over to our 2 panelists that we'll be hearing from. So we'll be hearing from first Almut Möller, and then we'll be hearing from Frank Rogers second. So Almut, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nina. Let me just say thank you so much for bringing us together, dear Peter Barnes, dear Ambassador Hoffmann, dear Henning, dear Nina Gillespie, dear Frank Rogers, dear Mari and Antonia, ladies and gentlemen, all on you on the screens. I'm really delighted. I would like to thank the British-German Association and Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft for the kind invitation and the opportunity. I think it's very timely to talk about the subjects we want to be looking at today. And it's also a very important time for cities in Germany and the United Kingdom to talk about these things. And it's a really good opportunity to exchange our development, the road that we have already started to embark on, but also to look at some of the challenges as Nina introduced. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to mapping out a little bit how in Hamburg we are looking at the climate transition that we're all going through, and the question of sustainability. I mean, sustainability is a field where science, technology, business, politics, and societal aspirations interact. And this means it is a highly complex issue, and there are a lot of topics we could cover. So the time that I was generously given will not be able to cover everything, but I would like to focus on three main pillars that are of special importance for Hamburg policymaking right now. Just to shed light on that and exchange views on that. And that is transport and urban mobility on the one hand, industry on the other, and thirdly, construction. So in this way, I hope to be able to give you an idea of how a city like Hamburg tries to actively contribute to the fight against climate change, and also to look at some of the challenges we have ahead in this trajectory. First, certainly on transport and urban mobility. It was in 2008 that the Senate, which is the government of Hamburg, added up the total distance that the people of Hamburg travel in one day. And the result was that this made up to around 60 million kilometers. Now, in 2018, 10 years later, this distance has gone up to 70 million kilometers a day. So that really is a big step. And one reason for growing traffic is the megatrend of urbanization. There is a great deal of interest. Lots of people are drawn into the big cities and metropolitan regions. And, they're attractive centers for business, science, culture. So this is something that cities have to deal with, and we are dealing with. Hamburg each year grows by about 20,000 inhabitants. So that is perhaps the equivalent of the size of a small German city. Will be interesting to hear how things look from the Liverpudlian end. Now, to ensure that everyone in Hamburg arrives at their destination safely and comfortably and on time, we increase our range of mobility services every year. So we are expanding our metro system and aim to complete more than 50 kilometers of new lines by 2035. In the past years, Hamburg made more than 200 kilometers of new bicycle paths and routes, because we feel there is a trend also to looking at embracing the bike as a way of mobility and exercise, I should say. So about 2/3 of all distances traveled in Hamburg are covered by foot, bicycle, bus, or rail. And we intend to increase this share in the next decade. However, this alone will most probably not be enough if we wish to meet the demands of growing traffic and changing mobility habits. And this is why Hamburg decided to really look thoroughly at the types of future mobility that that are emerging, and develop a kind of model city approach for future mobility. And this includes, for instance, a test track for self-driving cars, digital network traffic control, digitally coordinated construction sites, etc. And in the field of e-mobility, there is also a lot of activity. And recently, the city of Hamburg has launched a so-called sustainable urban mobility process, in which over a 3-year period, we are trying and will develop a strategic concept for future mobility, because there is so much innovation going on in this field. And I just seize the opportunity to just give some real-life examples. Yesterday, what that means, how we're implementing this mobility process. Just yesterday and the day before yesterday, Hamburg digitally hosted the National Cycling Congress, the German National Cycling Congress, and the National Cycling Plan was presented by the Federal Minister of Transport. I think I should perhaps say that for those of you who are not aware of the setup of Hamburg as a city-state, we are a city and metropolitan region, but we are also part of the German Federation. Like other cities as are Berlin and Bremen, we form one of the 16 federal states as a city-state. So for us, there is also a role in the national framework with working with the federal government. And in this framework, the National Cycling Plan, was presented yesterday by the Federal Minister of Transport in Hamburg. And over the next years, Hamburg will receive funds from this. So it shows you that in the national framework, that there is also a lot of combined activity. So we expect and hope that this convention will have a further positive impact on cycling in Hamburg. And there is also activity to build new cycling lanes, which I'm sure is happening in other places in Europe as well. One important landmark event later this year is the Intelligent Transport Systems World Congress in October 2021, which will be held in Hamburg. And there it's really the opportunity to look at a lot of the innovation that is going on globally, really. So this will be an opportunity. It's the Worldwide Convention of Intelligent Transport Solutions. And there are a lot of projects in the run-up already running in the city that will be part of the Congress as well, in which next generation mobility solutions are tested in real traffic. So there's also some exciting activity there. There are a lot of questions, of course, related to through traffic in the city center, and which we could perhaps talk about a little bit later. And by and large, I mean, public transport, on the other hand, of course, that needs to expand is a challenge. On the sort of first pillar of what I think I can take the time, this is what I can say for now. And I then want to also look at the industrial pillar, at the industry pillar, at the economy in our sustainability picture here. Hamburg is Europe's third largest port city. And it's a large, if not the largest location for industry in Germany, and part of a wider metropole area of 5 million inhabitants. So there is a lot of commuting also happening into our city, and there is also a lot of activity in the wider metropole region. We are aware that in the future, industrial production and modern life will continue, even in more climate-friendly circumstances, will continue to come along with a high need for energy. And so, for instance, with regard to digitalization, energy needs of electronic techniques and data processing centers are very high. So in some areas, perhaps the demand for energy will go even bigger. And one also has to keep in mind that adapting to climate-friendly energy systems comes with high costs for many companies in Europe, including in Hamburg. The adaptation process that needs to be supported, which of course is a big subject. And that is why for us it's also a question of the ecological, political and societal aspirations of climate protection, working with the competitive angle of industry in Hamburg, in Europe and beyond. So it's really about jobs, value creation, prosperity. For us in Hamburg, I mean, at the sort of constitutional level, Hamburg introduced an acknowledgement of global climate protection into the preamble of its constitution. And there is an ambitious climate plan with lots of very detailed steps to achieve climate neutrality. We are working for our part, I mean, when it comes to the port, just to give you an example, hoping that the respective industries in shipping and logistics will work climate neutrally by 2040. There is a lot of activity there. A key factor will be the use of hydrogen, which is a big theme. Will be really good to hear from the Liverpool angle as well. And so for us, I mean, the harbour is also in a way, of course, a testing ground of a lot of the things that are happening on the way to climate neutrality. There is infrastructure that was implemented to power ships for the duration of their stay in the port of Hamburg in innovative ways. We started with a landside power plant to power cruise ships in 2017, and the ships then don't need to burn fossil fuels while they are docked in Hamburg. So this will considerably decrease increase the air quality in the residential areas also located close to the port. I don't remember quite so well when I was in Liverpool what the situation is like with regard to, you know, the port and the people, but in Hamburg, and I remember it was close in Liverpool as well, that is what it is in Hamburg too, so that I think is also something that comes with challenges. For us, the question of the port also relates to the question of how we get things that arrive in Hamburg to other locations, and there is a lot of investment in rail. Last year, for the first time, more than 51% of all containers operated in the port of Hamburg left our harbour by rail. So there is, in the sort of shipping and rail connection, there is a lot of activity there as well. Just briefly on the third pillar, that is construction. Of course, we know that building is also a very important piece of the picture. Just to give you a few examples with regard to the system of district heating, Hamburg decided to end the use of coal. And the city is making progress with renovating public buildings with the aim of greater energy efficiency. This has been done in particular in schools over the past years. And by and large, sustainable construction is also an integral part of Hamburg's climate plan. So in conclusion, thanks for your time, we know and are aware that there is still a long way to go, and there's a lot of innovation happening, but there's, of course, as Nina pointed out, there's also a lot of challenge. And we in the city, we feel the pressure to adapt, and we have a lot of strength to innovate, but still, I mean, there are some there are great opportunities, but there are also things that need solutions. And of course, there's the question about most importantly, the people in our cities, what they expect from us. And I think ultimately we have the chance to gain both in economic strength and attractiveness as cities if we do it well. New technologies that serve climate protection will create and secure jobs, will make our companies more competitive, will reduce noise levels of transport, will lead to cleaner air, will make our cities more livable. And so this is a trajectory that we find ourselves in. And I really feel that to that end, it is very important, and this is also, I think, what citizens expect, many of which, especially the young generation, are afraid of the future, are afraid of what the world will look like. And this, I think, makes it imperative for us as cities in the European context to also learn from each other on this path of innovation and adaptation. And my understanding has been that this seminar is part of this process. So I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak here, and I'll leave it with that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Almut. That was really insightful. I'm going to pass over to you now, Frank.
Thanks, Nina. Thank you, Almut, and thank you for all of the attendees who are on the session today. First of all, I'd like to offer the apologies from our Metro Mayor, Steve Rotherham. Steve would have liked to have been in attendance for this evening's discussion, but he's unfortunately able to join us. He's got the small matter of an election that he has to prepare for a week today, so he's currently out on the campaign trail. I think that was incredibly interesting in the context that it demonstrates the similarities between our two cities, because for a number of the points that Almut had made, you could just replace Hamburg with Liverpool. The synergies are very, very strong between the two cities. So a little bit about our city region. Liverpool city region has a direct population of 1.6 million residents, but we have a functional economic geography of around 2.9 million when you consider the wider travel to work area, the strong links that the city region has with West Lancashire, Warrington, Cheshire West and Chester and North Wales. It's worth noting that over 30% of the people who are employed in the Deeside enterprise zone in North Wales area travel into their place of work from the city region, and there's an equivalent number of Welsh residents who make the opposite journey. So very strong synergies with North Wales as well as other parts of the Northwest. From a constitutional perspective, since 2017, we've had a mayoral combined authority governance system in place with Steve Rotherham as the directly elected mayor for the entire city region. And as mayor, he has a series of devolved powers and associated funding that's passed from central government to him and the combined authority. And those powers cover areas such as public transport, key route network from a highway perspective, economic development, spatial planning, strategic housing, and employment and skills. And there's actually not a lot you can't fit into one of those policy areas if you try hard enough. And wrapped around all of that, the climate emergency challenges and the carbon challenges that we face are impacted by each and every one of those areas. So there are, as Peter referenced, there are 6 separate local authority areas within the Liverpool City region. We have Halton, Knowsley, Liverpool as the core city, Sefton, St Helens and Wirral. They're all independent local authority areas in their own right, but they operate at a geographical and strategic city region-wide level under the banner of the combined authority in respect to the policy areas that I've referenced. We are part of the Northern Powerhouse initiative, which covers 15 million people across the north of England. And we have a unique position on the UK's west coast with a strong and global port, significant natural assets, which we're developing to promote sustainable growth, extensive offshore renewables, significant onshore wind and photovoltaic. We are in the process of developing a project to capture tidal power from the River Mersey. It has a very large tidal range approaching 9.5 to 10 meters. And again, similarly to Hamburg, developing hydrogen infrastructure. We're fortunate that one of the chemical plants that are situated in Halton generates significant quantities of hydrogen as a waste product. We want to try and make sure we can capture that and utilize it from an energy perspective. And similarly, again, we're repositioning our transport system to put a much stronger focus on active modes of travel, so cycling and walking. We're developing a number of new neighbourhoods across our city region, and we're also reshaping existing neighbourhoods. And we're looking to refocus our skills and our educational infrastructure to meet the future needs of both our businesses and our people. And the climate agenda is a fundamental part of everything that we're looking at. We've declared a climate emergency as each of the separate 6 local authorities and collectively as a combined authority. So that is very much the lens through which we look at all of our policy decisions. Everything is tested against the principles of a climate emergency. But similarly, again, port and port development as per Hamburg, critical to us in the Liverpool City region. Approximately 6 years ago now, Peel Port, to operate the principal port facility in the city, generated a deep sea port facility that facilitated the capacity of the Port of Liverpool to move from being able to handle 5% of the world's container vessels to now being able to handle 95% of the world's container vessels. So it's truly transformational, and they are looking for a 3-fold increase in the numbers of containers that the port is able to handle. It also does extensive bulk cargo management, but from a container perspective, the growth is truly transformational. And similarly, again, to the points that Almut referenced, the connectivity to the port is absolutely vital for us. So through Northern Powerhouse and Transport for the North, we're looking to ensure that the appropriate HS2 / Northern Powerhouse rail connectivity is provided into the city from a passenger perspective, but with the additional benefit that significantly enhancing the passenger capability on the existing network will free up paths on the existing network that are currently used for passengers for freight. And the promotion of freight onto rail from the Port of Liverpool and to the Port of Liverpool, we've calculated has the potential to take 200 million heavy goods vehicle miles per year off the UK highway network, a massive environmental benefit. That is not just city region in its nature, it's not just northern in its nature, it benefits the whole of the UK. We have got significant and globally important innovation assets in relation to life sciences and infectious disease management. Never been more important than it is at the current unfortunate time. Digitalization, not just Industry 4.0, but across the whole economy. We have one of the two most powerful computers in the UK, situated at Gillespie in Holton, the Hartree supercomputer. And that processes big data and facilitates artificial intelligence developments. We have digital connectivity as one of the key objectives of the city region. And again, one thing that the last 12 to 15 months, I think, has demonstrated to all of us the absolute critical role that digital infrastructure and digital connectivity provides, not just for the businesses and for the economy, but for the residents and for general access into the digital world. We also have an ambition to be net zero in our city region by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the declared UK target. And we've worked extensively with companies the likes of Ørsted, Siemens, and Vestas to develop our significant offshore renewables sector. As I've touched on, we're looking now to develop a project to generate tidal power from the River Mersey, and another to create a hydrogen supply infrastructure, part utilising the waste product that I referenced earlier, but in support of the introduction of hydrogen buses onto our city region bus network, hydrogen-driven trains that Alstom are looking to develop in their facility within Holton, and generally create a hydrogen supply infrastructure that facilitates a significant move towards hydrogen-powered vehicles. We don't see that the solution is all electric, or the solution is all hydrogen, or the solution is an ongoing element of carbon generating fuels. There needs to be a blend and a balance that looks to address the challenges that we face. Because again, I agree with Almut, there are challenges there, but there are also very significant opportunities. And in response to COVID, we have a recovery plan in place that we submitted back to government in July of last year, looking to support economic recovery post the pandemic, but with an incredibly strong focus on building back better and creating sustainable, inclusive growth for the residents of our city region, driven by fair employment approaches and fair employment charters. But I think the strands that have been referenced in relation to transport and sustainable transport, construction, housing, and digitization, very, very similar to those that have been voiced in respect of Hamburg. So thanks, Nina.
Thanks so much, Frank. And thanks for sharing with us, both of you, the work that's been done in your cities. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you, but before I do, I'd encourage anyone watching and listening to post questions that you have for our speakers in the Q&A box. So reflecting on some of the points that both of you have raised, and I think, reflecting on the year that we've just had, COVID-19 has obviously hugely disrupted everyday travel patterns in cities across the world. And you've both referenced the need to kind of shift mobility patterns in our cities. And there's been an increased interest in people traveling by foot and by bike. How can we ensure that there isn't a significant shift away from public transport towards car ownership? And have you seen any evidence of this already happening in your cities? Almut, I'll go to you first.
Yes, thanks, Nina. Colleagues looked this up in the run-up to this, because you have a very important question there in Hamburg. The use of public transportation in the course of the past year or so has decreased by up to 65%. But there are certainly people switching to cars, but there's also a significant number of people working in home office solutions. Need to keep that in mind. And what we also know in Hamburg is that we saw a considerable increase of about 30% of bicycle use which is, you know, in between 2019 and 2020 already. And we saw that this trend, really significant trend, got a push again with the COVID pandemic. So for us, it's also a question while looking more thoroughly into the data, of course, you know, how to encourage that and how to sort of build and seize the opportunity to provide for infrastructure that makes it easier to cycle around town. So this is how we are looking at it.
Thank you. Frank, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Nina. I think I'll take your second part of the question first. Is there evidence of increased car use? Yes, I think is the simple and straightforward answer as a consequence of COVID. But I think we can address that and we can get back into a much better position, because there are some very significant benefits that people have identified in the midst of the challenge that has been COVID. Air quality has improved, work-life balance has improved, the approach to work has changed. And I think one of the challenges that we're all facing, we don't yet have a clarity of understanding as to exactly what those impacts will be. So will we get everyone back into the workspace as per pre-COVID? No, we will not. I think that's a fact, and we need to recognise that. But understanding the impacts that will have on public transport use and understanding the impacts that will have on our city is something that's going to require very significant analysis over the coming years, because the impacts could be quite extensive. For us in the Liverpool city region, our public transport network's got three main components to it. There's the bus that is the dominant element, the intra-city train network that we have, and the ferries. With national lockdown and the message from government to stay at home wherever possible, we saw a massive decline in public transport use during the pandemic, and that's had several impacts. One of them is revenue loss in relation to the network that is owned and operated by the combined authority, so ferries as an element of that. And on the rail network, our local intra-urban rail network, Merseyrail, saw patronage fall as low as 7% of pre-COVID levels at the height of the pandemic. The bus network, which is predominantly operated by private operators, also saw significant patronage loss and got down to about 15% of pre-COVID levels. So very significant impact. Private car use reduced, but to nowhere near the same extent. And now, as we are coming out of the worst excesses of COVID, ferries, bus and rail patronage is approaching 40 to 45% of pre-COVID level. But as a comparator, we as the combined authority own and operate the two Mersey road tunnels. They're back, they're tolled, so we have very accurate levels of traffic flow. They're back at over 85% of pre-COVID levels in comparison to the 40 to 45% on ferries, bus and rail. That's a challenge that we've got to address now. Social distancing requirements are contributing to the figures, as it's nigh on impossible to operate ferries, trains and buses at full capacity with a 2-meter social distancing requirement. But as Almut has said, we do know very clearly our residents are walking and cycling more and they're enjoying it, and we're investing heavily in both to support active travel. And as restrictions are further lifted, whilst we might be likely to see more car travel initially, we have to look to address that in the short and medium term, and categorically in the long term. And opportunities exist to deliver against that. We've got a city region cycle and walking infrastructure plan. We're creating cycle lanes across the whole city region and trying to get one joined up city region cycle network. That means once you are on it, you can stay on it and travel around the city region. We're also exploring options around how we get increased control over the bus network to make sure that the network is better aligned with the travel needs of the public, and to promote more use of public transport and active travel, and making car travel less attractive into the city centre of Liverpool and the town centres of each of the constituent local authority areas. But yeah, it is a challenge. We've just got to make sure we capture the opportunity.
Thanks. And I guess on the back of that, I mean, this is part of the recovery from COVID-19 is negotiating some of these challenges. And you both touched on some of the ways in which economic recovery packages might be supporting some of this more sustainable activity. Do you have any more sort of specific comment or example on how you will be using green economic recovery funds to build back better after COVID-19, and what areas particularly you want to be focusing on? Almut, I'll go to you first again.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. I would also take a sort of a bigger picture on this, as Frank did as well. For us, there's an important framework, again, in cooperation with the federal level, with the government, the federal government in Berlin, that has worked with the federal states on recovery plans, and there is also a recovery plan the government of Hamburg has been embracing. And then for us as a city that is part of the Union, the European Union, there is also the EU angle of things with the Green Deal program, in which the Commission put forward this ambitious recovery and sort of growth plan that is delivering to the green objectives. So these are all three important reference points. And for us, they all, I like the Build Better slogan, Frank, that you introduced to me. They all have this component to really seize the opportunity to do what we already knew needed doing, and really combine the challenge of the pandemic with some real innovative push. And so this is the wider framework that we're engaging in. And so the European context for us is also very important there. In concrete terms, I mean, there is, of course, for industry right now in the pandemic, for some sectors, particular challenges. Hamburg is looking to the world, as Liverpool is. We have a strong economy that benefits really and depends on connectivity working, and a single market of the European Union that is really delivering on, you know, the promise of mobility and all of that. And for us, very concretely, of course, as we go through the pandemic and you know, discover that, for instance, on what I talked about earlier on the harbor, on the port questions, you know, that we embrace, the packages that are now coming both from Hamburgian level and the federal level and the European level, that look at innovation in the harbor, digitalization as another mega trend. They are being directed and used to the end of, you know, delivering to the climate goals. So I think while a year ago, if I remember, when we had a discussion pretty much around this time in Hamburg City Hall in a digital format on the impact of COVID, and, you know, what it would mean for the economies, and also what it would mean for the European plans that had already been put forward by the Commission, there was a question about, you know, will this sort of economic recovery and the need to recover and the need to help out companies and citizens, will it marginalize the green ambitions? I don't know whether that was a discussion also in Britain, but I remember there were real concerns about this not working out. And a year later, I feel things are, you know, falling in a good place on this one, and we see it on various levels. And it's very interesting to hear also from you, Frank, that this is the way you're looking at it. I think, you know, after a year, I can be confident to say that, you know, that it's swinging, it's working, it has gained speed, and those who were sort of, you know, challenging, luckily didn't prove quite that right.
Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Again, I completely agree with that. One of the things that COVID has done is it's put a massive boost behind things that I think we all knew needed to be done, but we were not able to move at the pace that we would like to see things move at, for a whole variety of reasons. Some of them political, some of them financial, some of them societal. But I think what COVID has done is put a focus to some of those issues and an acceleration to some of those issues that actually that reflects the opportunities that I'm talking about. UK government, I think, have got this now to a greater extent, and they've produced a couple of policy documents over the course of the last 12 months. One called Gear Change, which is about cycling, and it's very clear now that government's approach is they will not support funding on the highway network if the schemes that are looking to be delivered do not give appropriate consideration of cycling and walking as part and parcel of their design. And it's not from a lip service perspective, it has to be an integral part of the activities that you're looking to undertake on the highway infrastructure network, or that funding will not be sanctioned. Similarly, they've recently issued a national bus strategy, and the national bus strategy follows the same approach. If you don't make appropriate provisions on the bus network for prioritisation and to facilitate the use of public transport, your ability to generate the revenue from a funding perspective that you're looking for will not be met by central government. So it is becoming more and more a key driver that if you want to invest on your highway infrastructure, it has to accommodate appropriate cycling and walking interventions and significantly bus priority interventions as well. So for us, that is part of what is Build Back Better is about. We don't want to go back to normal. We don't want to lose some of the benefits that COVID has generated for us. And we want to take that acceleration benefit and look to create green corridors on our transport networks. We're looking to make more pedestrianised areas in the city centre. Look for the city centres and for our district centres to be far more walkable. And we also, as part of trying to link the economic recovery of some of our leisure and hospitality industries, because again, Almut is right, there has to be a balance. It has to be about recovering the economy at the same time as dealing with the health issues that COVID has presented, at the same time as dealing with the climate challenges that we face, at the same time as dealing with the health and well-being of our residents. And that's a multi-dimensional issue that I'll be totally honest with you. I don't think anyone will get 100% right first time round. We are going to make mistakes, but as long as the intent and the principle is right, we've got the opportunity, and we need to try and make sure we get progress and not perfection, because sometimes the strive for perfection can create massive delays and you don't get anywhere. But linking the sustainability of the transport network with cycling and walking badged as active travel and operating in a different way from an economic perspective and from a leisure and hospitality perspective can work together. We have a COVID recovery initiative in the city region called Liverpool Without Walls. And Liverpool Without Walls required specific planning permissions to be able to close off a number of the city centre streets, but to create a pavement cafe type culture on those streets, because we've took the vehicles away, and we took the opportunity whilst the vehicle numbers were down to facilitate that. And there's a very significant public clamour now for us not to go back and not to reopen some of those streets and to leave them as pedestrianised areas and to create that cycling, walking and pavement culture. So it's not perfect. It won't perhaps be right first time around, but I think the general principles are totally correct. And we are starting to see the changes take place.
Thanks both so much. I'm going to turn to some of the questions coming in from the audience as well now, and tie them a bit in with some of the other questions I had. I think both of you talked a lot about sort of technology and innovation in being a potential driving force for sustainability and for change in cities. A question from Chris Youngman is about how important this and the Internet of Things are in enabling a future sustainable city, particularly things like blockchain technology. And I think this relates to a more specific question I had around sort of the scaling of infrastructure, for example, electric charging, alternative fuels, and how we can basically better take advantage of these technologies to drive sustainability in cities. Frank, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up, but I will confess at the start of this, I'm 59 years of age, and Chris, I think, is probably from a younger age level than I am, and understands things like blockchain technologies to a greater extent than I do. But I think it's hugely important, Chris, and I think that's being reflected. Look at where we would have been if in the preceding 12 to 15 months, we haven't had the capability to utilize Zoom and Teams and all the things that digital connectivity and digital capability presents for you. We've been incredibly surprised that we've been able to operate our organization with having less than 5% of the staff resident in the office at any one time. And we've done it now for a longer period than we ever anticipated, but we could not have done it without the adequate digital connectivity and the adequate digital technology to facilitate that. From a broader industry perspective, and touching on some of our aspirations for digital connectivity and capability across the city region, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, all of the things that are coming from an industry perspective, advanced manufacturing, digital is going to be king and queen in the course of the next 5 to 10 years. It's absolutely vital for us. I just do not think there is an option. Again, referring back to a conference we were at yesterday, a face-to-face conference in the city, a number of the presenters at that conference made it incredibly clear that if any industry or organization has not embraced technology and digitization over the course of the last 5 years, the last 12 to 15 months should have convinced them that they now have to. And if they do not do that, they will not be around in 3 to 5 years' time. So massively important in the context of recovery and change in the way that we operate.
Thanks, Frank. Almut?
I just want to add, agreeing with really Frank on the overall line that Hamburg has adopted a strategy, City Hall adopted a strategy on digitalization for the city that really encompasses all aspects that you can imagine. And I'm, as Frank says, not an expert in that myself, but I was amazed to discover what is in, this theme, including for how you govern a city, public administration. Hamburg currently, there is a sort of nationwide endeavor to help public administration go more digital and make life better for citizens, be more service oriented. And Hamburg is in the lead right now for this year, which is a collaboration with the other federal states. So there is a lot happening in this field, and that includes all the questions also that Frank touched upon. I think personally, it is really also a challenge to connect all those dots. The complexity has been described by Frank, and I really liked how you put forward that mistakes will be made along the way, because I mean there is really a lot of spheres of innovation that have been working for quite some time. To me, it feels like a lot of things are coming together now, and there's also different cultures coming together, and so that I think in the digital world. Still also means that we're learning to work with each other in the different systemic and systematic ways of thinking. And while I think there has been already progress done, there is also still some way to go. And yeah, just to say, I mean, yes, it's a very, very important field. And here again, I think the learning piece is important, and the exchange of practice, and we are hoping to learn about the aspect of sustainable mobility in intelligent and smart ways at the conference that I described that is happening in Hamburg later this year in October, where we can learn from other parts of the world that have already had their experience. So this will be also a hands-on opportunity, which I think can also be And I think Frank suggested that as well, an exciting, a fun, a creative process that we're embarking on.
Great, thanks so much. Another question that we have from Rianne Chilcott is on the topic of residential housing, which obviously is a huge contributor to emissions. And Rianne mentioned particularly private-owned homes, which obviously requires action and investment by individuals. And I think it's worth mentioning or worth hearing a bit more about strategies that your cities are adopting to really ensure that sustainability of the whole life cycle of the inbuilt environment is improved from construction to end of life, and also how you can kind of drive change in these sort of residential situations that are maybe a bit more complex. Frank, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. Really important point, and I completely agree, Ryan. It is a huge contributor to the problem. In the Liverpool City region, we reckon we have in excess of 450,000 properties that are incredibly inefficient in relation to their heat loss as a consequence of that energy consumption. And so we have a program of retrofit that we are trying to get government to support, and it's not proven incredibly successful at the moment, but we're hoping we will be able to get something from this year's spending review. But there isn't the benefit in generating sustainable power in a far more carbon friendly way if all that you're doing is letting it go out through the walls and through the roofs and waste effectively within residential houses. So we're looking to promote an approach where all the houses that we look to create in the city region don't have gas connections to them from a natural gas perspective. Therefore, they can't have gas-powered central heating, which is a huge contributor to this. And try and make sure that we don't extend the problem and the challenge that Ryan has highlighted, because that's only going to make it more difficult to resolve. But in parallel with that, look to do the retrofit work that we can in relation to insulation of properties, in relation to removal of gas central heating systems, and create far more efficient existing housing stock, whilst at the same time ensuring that the new housing stock doesn't exacerbate any of the challenges that we already face. It is difficult because significant numbers are in private hands, and significant numbers, even in the rental sector, are in private rental stock, and the housing associations own them as well. So there is a challenge there. But again, it's a challenge that we have to find a solution to, because inefficient homes are contributing very, very significantly to the carbon challenge that we have.
Yeah, I think not really very much to add here, other than saying yes, that of course is also something very important to look at in Hamburg. From our perspective, there's really a huge potential for energy, for savings in energy, emissions, etc. So there's still a lot to work on, behavioral challenge, and a lot of, in a way, it's a very complex thing, because you have to bring together so many technical, economic, and social aspects, and to study that and to really understand the interaction is something that our Ministry of Housing and Urban Development is currently looking at. There is one piece of legislation that Hamburg has adopted that is very relevant in this field. That is that wherever possible, sustainable materials like recycled concrete is being used. And whenever public buildings are ready for demolition, there is always an evaluation now of, the question whether a remodeling of the building makes more sense from a climate protection perspective or not. So this is underway. And this is also, as Frank said, I mean, we're in the middle of this transition, but just to shed a little bit light on that.
Thank you. We've probably got time for just one or two more questions as we're coming up to the end. A really good question from Paul Bristow, which I think speaks to some of what we've touched on already around the effects of COVID-19 is around whether working from home will obviously reduce environmental impact of traveling into city centre offices, but it may also lead to the hollowing out of city centres. And so how are your cities thinking about approaching this conflict? Almut, could we start with you?
Yes, thanks for raising. This is a very important issue and problem that we are also discussing in Germany right now, not only in Hamburg, how to really make sure that what has been a trend already with the city centers changing over the years, and retail and shopping going elsewhere, etc. So this is something that COVID has really accentuated, and so this is a conversation between cities in Germany, as I'm sure it will also be in the UK. I don't have a great deal of answers right now because it's again one of those areas where the situation of COVID has really meant, you see it often also in shops that are no longer etc. That is sort of being studied, is underway, is being understood because it exacerbates trends that we have already seen, and we like to look at it as a kind of an opportunity also to reshape the inner cities. I think Frank also talked about that a little bit.
Frank, would you like to come in?
Yes, thanks, Nina. I think it's a conflict that exists right now. So I think the point again is an incredibly valid one. We are experiencing it in our city and within our town centres. I'll just give you the example from our own perspective. I mentioned earlier that operating our office facilities on 5 to 10% of pre-COVID staffing levels, we're right in the city centre. So for us, that 90 to 95% of staff not being there is approaching 500 people, and we're just one building. So multiply that across the whole city centre. The shops, the restaurants, the bars, the cafe shops, all those facilities aren't getting the footfall that they would normally get if the city was operating as normal. So the conflict real, and the conflict exists now, and it is about balance. It's how do you manage that conflict to come out with the right outcome, and it will not happen overnight. So we've got to work on understanding how we get the transport right, the built environment right, the approach to office facilities right. How do we support the retail economy to deliver against that? And it is going to be a challenge. I think conflict of interest is a really good way of describing it, because that is what it is. Unfortunately, that's what we're employed to do. And I think that so we've got to try and manage that conflict of interest to get the right environmental outputs from this and outcomes from this, the right economic outputs from it. But the balance isn't going to be the same on a continuing and ongoing basis. So what might be right to do today will not be right to do in 12 months or 5 years or 10 years time. And there's still a lot we need to understand as a consequence of the impact of COVID, because I could not tell you with any degree of certainty what we anticipate the patronage levels being on our bus, rail and ferry networks in each of the next 5 to 10 years. And as a consequence of not having that certainty, which historically we have had, by the way, so I think that's the difference. Historically, we've had a degree of certainty. Moving forward now, we could quite readily be 30 to 40% out. So we're going to have to continually review, assess and change how we deal with it. But we have to try and get the balance right between the economy working in the right way, work-life balance effective, transport effective, and cities operating and functioning effectively. It's a difficult one.
Definitely. We're approaching the end very quickly, so I'm going to just squeeze in one very tiny last question and ask you both to just respond to it as briefly as possible, which is not a small question in many ways, but kind of referring to Glenn Abbott, who sort of talks around some of the more dramatic changes that we might need to see in our city centres to really achieve the change that we need to meet climate change. And ahead of COP26 this year, I guess, what do you see as the role of your cities as leaders in setting ambitious targets and being demonstrators of climate action? And how do you think you can share those learnings in 30 seconds each? Almut, do you want to go first?
Sorry, Nina, just to make sure I get the question right, how sort of, how can we share, what we know and how can we collectively push? Was that the question?
How can you be demonstrators of climate action and how can you share those learnings with other cities?
Thanks. Yeah, I think, we are very open to look elsewhere, and already this seminar has shown how great it is just to hear, from other city leaders, how you're approaching things, Frank. And I think I see a trend really for cities where we feel the pressure to adapt, but also feel that there's strength, innovative strength to really come together and exchange. There's various city networks that I'm sure Liverpool is also engaging in, as is Hamburg, a lot of the Euro cities and other networks. And so there is a big conversation going on. And it's good to see that we're not standing alone. Mayor Chencho for Hamburg, with his leadership, has established and settled an ambitious plan. And it's good that others have done so. So, we can sort of carry each other along the way, because as Frank said, and I agree with him, this is also in many ways uncharted territory.
Thanks very much. And the last word to you, Frank.
Thanks. We're in danger of fundamentally agreeing on most things, I think, on this session. Again, yeah, it is a challenge, but we need to, as I referenced earlier, look at all the policies that we have through that lens of a climate emergency. Now, what might have been acceptable 5, 10, 15 years ago is no longer acceptable. And I think the whole world has woken up to the challenge of a climate emergency. It's moved incredibly quickly, but it's still not moved quickly enough. And so we need to push, we need to drive. But I think there is another key factor within this, or there is in the UK anyway. I can't speak for Germany, but another key factor in this is a lack of consistency between local and national approaches, and how we ensure that alignment and policy consistency and funding consistency is actually building on each other rather than conflicting and contradicting with each other. So one of the big challenges that we have is the amount of fuel duty revenue that government get from petrol and diesel. And in consideration of that, the car lobby have an incredibly strong position. That challenge needs to be dealt with nationally to be able to support some of the local initiatives that we and other areas would like to implement, because one is conflicting with the other. And policy alignment, I think, is becoming something, again, that is clearer and better understood by government. There is very little, whether it be transport, whether it be housing, whether it be maritime, whether it be construction in general, that doesn't have a significant climate impact. And so you need to think about climate in everything that you do. But I think that's only just becoming part and parcel of national policy setting, that everything is being looked at in the appropriate way. And that's the only way we can deliver what Glenn is suggesting, I think.
Exactly. Brilliant. Well, I think we'll close there. So thank you so much, Almut and Frank. Really fascinating discussion. And also thank you to our hosts for this event. I'll now hand back to Antonia and Mari.
Yes, I'd also like to extend a very warm thank you to Almut Möller, Frank Rogers and Nina Gillespie for joining us this evening on Zoom and for the really informative discussion. Thank you to everyone in the audience as well for joining us tonight and for asking such interesting questions. I hope you enjoyed the event. And lastly, I'd also like to thank the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, of course, for co-organising this event with us. As many of you will know, this is the first event in a joint series that the BGA is hosting with the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft on British-German climate action. So we look forward to welcoming you to the second event later this year.
Yes, I don't think I have anything to add to that. Thank you all so much for coming and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Good evening to Liverpool.
Bye, Hamburg. Hopefully we'll speak again, Almut.
Yes, looking forward to it. Bye, Frank.
Cheers now. Bye all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.